Hey guys, Rob here at 3D Printscape. Today I'm going to show you how to calibrate the E-steps on a 3D printer. By default, if you're using an Ender 3, the value is going to be 93, but if you're starting to see any type of over or under extruding issues, or if you're starting to swap out parts like your hot end, changing over to direct drive, things like that, I think it's important that you recalibrate it. The process is not difficult. I know a lot of people recommend using computer and kind of controlling everything from that side, but I think that that's overkill in most situations, and you're going to be able to get to probably 99% of the same accuracy just by doing it by hand. We are going to need a couple tools to complete the process. We're going to need a permanent marker to mark on the filament, a set of digital calibers. You can also use just like a metal ruler if you wanted to, but you can get better results if you have one of these. They're not expensive, and they're definitely good to have around if you're doing any type of calibrations on your printer. And then some filament. I would recommend a lighter color just so you can see the marker. Alright, so before we get started, if you guys haven't already, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks. Alright, so I did 2 test prints just to kind of show you what it looks like if you're over or under extruding. I'll zoom in on these when they were printing here in a minute, but I wanted to kind of show you them side by side. Here's an example of under extruding. You can basically see straight through it in most spots. It's very flimsy, and the overall print, if you were to finish it, would be pretty brittle and have a lot of gaps in it. This is probably 40% under extruding if I had to guess. I kind of went a little bit extreme on both of these, but I wanted to be able to show you them as an example. And then next to that, here's over extruding at about the same. You can somewhat see here that it's very rough on the surface. You're pushing a lot of filament into places where it really shouldn't be going. It's going to end up giving a lot of blobs and zits on the outside surfaces. And overall, it will be stronger, I guess, per se, because there's more filament, but the overall quality is going to be a lot lower. It's not going to be what you're looking for. So ideally, you're going to want somewhere in between these two, which is what I'm going to show you how to get to now. If you have any questions about the process, go ahead and leave a comment below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Alright guys, here's an example of some extreme under extruding. If you could look closely, you can see that there are a lot of gaps in between the lines. If this was coming out as expected, it would be more of a even flush surface, but when you're under extruding, you tend to get a lot of gaps in between the lines just because there's not enough filament. In this example, it thinks it's extruding about 100 millimeters of filament. In reality, it's at probably 60, so that's really going to end up messing with the overall print quality and strength. Alright guys, here's an example of what happens if you're over extruding. As you can see here, this really sticks up a lot more. The surface is not smooth. It's because you're kind of jamming more filament into an area than it's expecting. You're starting to get little blobs and stuff off to the side. I think this is a pretty harsh example because I added about 50% to the E-steps, but if you are over extruding, I kind of wanted to show you what it looks like. If I was to have let this print finish, it would look awful. There'd be blobs and zits everywhere. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do before we start measuring or marking anything is go ahead and heat up the hot end so we can push a little bit of filament through. I'm going to show you how to do that using the standard display because that's what I think most people are going to end up having, and then I'll briefly show you at the end how to do all of it if you're using the touchscreen side. Alright, so let's go ahead and go into temperature, and then we want to go to nozzle. And then let's heat this up to where you typically print around. So I'm just going to go to 210. Alright, then we're going to wait for that to heat up. Alright, now that we are pretty much up to temperature, we can go ahead and push some filament through. So we'll just go back into our menu, go to motion, move axis, go down to extruder, and then we can go ahead and just push 10 millimeters through. Make sure it comes out evenly. If it doesn't, you can just go ahead and keep feeding it until it does. Basically, we're just trying to make sure everything is primed and ready to go. So that's good to go. Now we can go ahead and do our measurements. Before we do that, let me show you what it would look like if you were using the touchscreen side. So let's just go back up to our main menu. Jump over to touchscreen. Wait for the printer to attach. Alright, then we can just go to nozzle here. This is where you'd set your temperature. As you can see, it's already set to 210, but you would increase, decrease accordingly. And then if you go to menu, extrude, you can push filament through, and then you can change your amounts here. Alright, so let's go and go back over to simulator mode. Alright guys, now that everything's up to temperature and has been purged, we can go ahead and get started. So first thing we want to do is set our calipers to 120 millimeters. We're going to feed 100 millimeters of filament through, but we want 120 so that we can see any type of over extruding. Because if we just marked it at 100 and it was over extruding, we wouldn't know how much it was over extruding by. Alright, so let's go ahead and set this to 120 and then tighten this down. Alright, so we are set to basically 120 here. So now we're going to go ahead and kind of put this where the filament is feeding into the printer and pull the filament down, and then we can mark right here at the 120 millimeter mark. We want to just get a nice clean mark. I mark it so that the outside of the line is at the 120, so it's not in the middle. It's just easier to read it that way. Alright, and now we want to go ahead and start feeding the filament through. So if we go over to our printer, go to motion, go to move axis and extruder, and then go to the 10 millimeter. If you just went to it for the first time, it shows the extruder at 0, so that way when you start making the adjustments, you can see how much has actually gone through. We want to slowly start turning this. I'm basically just doing 10 millimeters at a time so that we're not forcing too much filament through. If you were using the computer software to do it, I think it would take about a minute or so to push the 100 millimeters through. It's basically just preventing any type of mechanical inaccuracies. If we were to just do this and just jump it straight to 100 really quick, you're going to start to hear grinding at the gears and stuff because it's just going to try to push that through as fast as it can. Alright, then now that we got the 100 millimeters through, we're going to go ahead and remeasure, see what we got. Alright, so now we want to measure from the same spot. If you're using a flat ruler, it would be on the outside. If you're using digital calipers like these, this will kind of go into the slot a little bit, so you want to make sure that you're measuring from the same spot. And then you want to measure the outside of that line. So right now we are at 27.02. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and run through that process 2 more times because I like to take the average of 3 just to give me a little bit better results. Then we'll go ahead and start talking about the little bit of math that we have to do afterwards. And yeah, I know, we have to do math. Alright, so after using a little bit of editing magic there, I went through and I did the additional 2 times. I'll talk about that in a second. I wanted to make a note that if you are using the touchscreen mode, let me just go back to that really quick, that you would just go under extrude and just load like we were talking about before. But the main thing is, if you just went into this and you haven't been into it for a while, it might show that it's at 5 millimeters or whatever on the screen. I don't trust that because it will just default to one of the values. I'm not quite sure which one it is. I think it might just be the 5 millimeter. But if the last time you had it up, you ran 100 millimeters through as an example, under that setting, because you can do 1, 5, 10, 100, or 200, it might show that you are about to just push 5 millimeters through, but as soon as you hit that, it's going to jump up to 100. I don't know why it doesn't actually reset it based on what it's trying to do. But that's something that has burned me before. If that happens, you're going to have to remark your filament. So just something to keep in mind. Alright, so now let's talk about the results. The first time through, I got 27.02. Then second time I got 28.35. And the third time I got 27.93. So they were all relatively close to each other. So what I did was I just Added those up, divided by 3, and it gave me a value of 27.76, which is what we're going to use for the rest of this process. Alright, so I'm going to zoom in on my little whiteboard here. Please forgive my handwriting, it's not the best, but I think kind of just showing you what I'm talking about as I'm doing it would make more sense than just talking through it. Alright, so here's what we got. We had 120 millimeters that we marked initially. We had 27.76 left. So we want to subtract the 27.76 from the 120, and that's going to give us 92.24 millimeters. That's how much filament actually went through when we were expecting 100. So we are under extruding just a little bit, but enough that it could make a difference. Alright, so the next step is we want to multiply our current E-steps value by 100. Right now we are using the default value of 93 because that's what it was set to, but let me just pause here for a second. We'll jump over to the screen and I'll show you how to actually get that value. Alright, now I'm going to show you how to get the current E-steps value if you're using the standard display or simulator mode. You want to go to configuration, advanced settings, scroll down to steps per millimeter, and then you have your E-steps down here at the bottom. And then if you needed to change it, you would just change it in either direction to get to the value you're looking for. Like I said before, the default value is 93. And then you'll go back once that's changed. And then you want to go and make sure that you save it. So you go back up, go down to store settings. And then that's going to save your settings. Alright, now let's jump over to touchscreen mode so I can show you how to do it over there. It's a lot easier here. You'll just go to menu, settings, machine, parameter, and then steps per minute. And it's going to be the bottom value right here. By default, it's set to 93. And as you can see, it's still set to that right now. Alright, so now you see how to get that value. Alright, so now we want to take our new value here, so the 9300, and divide it by 92.24, and that's going to give us 108.82. So that's going to be our new E-step value. So now let's go ahead and jump over to the printer and I'll show you how to set the new value. Alright, so first I'm going to show you how to set the value on the standard display. Basically we want to go to where we got the initial value. So we go to configuration, advanced settings, and then down to steps per millimeter, and then down to E-steps. Then we want to just bump this up to our 108.82. And then in this mode, we can only go to 108.8. We can't get to the second decimal. So we'll just go ahead and save that. Then go back up to configuration. Now we want to go down to store settings. Alright, so now that that's saved, let's go ahead and jump over to our touchscreen mode. And I'll show you how to do it over there too. Alright, so we just want to go into menu, settings, machine, parameter, and then steps per millimeter. And then we want to go down to E again. So then here we can go to the second decimal. So we can just do 108.82 like we want to. And then save it and back out. And it's going to remind you to save it to your EEPROM. So we go ahead and do that. And that's really all there is to it. So now I'm going to go ahead and kick off another print and kind of show you what it looks like on the first layer with the correct settings. Another thing to note is you can go ahead and run through the test one more time just to make sure you're getting the value you expect. It should be at around 20 instead of the 27.76 that we were getting. Alright guys, so as you can see here, after we finish the calibration, we're getting much smoother lines. Please ignore some of the imperfections on the bed itself. This is my test build plate and it's been beat up pretty bad. But this is looking a lot better, a lot smoother than the other two did. And I don't see any gaps in between the layers, which we did when we were under extruding, but I'll take that off in a minute just to verify as well. Alright guys, I went ahead and took the last test off of the build plate and it looks really good, so I'm going to go ahead and run with those settings. As you can see, the process wasn't too difficult. There was a little bit of math involved, but overall not bad. It didn't take too long, and it's something that I would highly recommend doing if you're going to be doing any types of tweaking around the hot end, or if you're going to be messing with the stepper motors or anything like that, just to make sure that you are pushing the right amount of filament through that hot end. I've got the micro Swiss hot end on here, and even though it says it's a direct swap out, which I guess technically it is from a physical standpoint, it still affected the throughput. So if you did that upgrade as well, I would recommend just go ahead and running through the each step calibration. But if you guys have any questions on the process, or like any additional information, or would like me to create any other videos, go ahead and leave a comment below. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.